So marriage is in decline. The institution of marriage is in decline. And according to a statistic from this video that we're going to analyze from the Jefferies show, marriage rates are lower than we've seen in over a century. Why might that be? And why am I bringing this up in a series about civil war in the United States? The Jefferies show is this Comedy Central show. It's one of a dime a dozen sort of political hot takes on the news, and most of them are pretty poor in quality. You know, there was the very excellent Daily Show back in the day, the original with Jon Stewart. There's Last Week Tonight with John Oliver, and John Oliver's pretty funny. Jefferies, I think, is one of the funnier ones because he is a brilliant stand-up. But his show was recently canceled, but a little while back, he made this video called Marriage in Decline. And it's, you know, typical Comedy Central political TV. At the same time, there's a brilliance in the way that it articulates this modern sentiment, this distrust of marriage, and this view of marriage as an outdated and archaic institution. The clearest way to see this articulated is to look at this as a cultural artifact. Imagine that you're an archaeologist from 1,000 years in the future, right? And you're looking at the causes of America's Civil War. What was happening before Americans fought the Second Civil War? Well, this is one of the things that was happening, is they viewed marriage as a no longer worthwhile institution. And here is a document from that era to show exactly what we were feeling at the time. So let's start.
Who knows why some things have staying power and some don't? Air pumps in your shoes, Blues Traveller, the kids from Jerry Maguire, and smoking in hospitals. All things that we thought would be around forever, but didn't quite survive. And now another long-standing cultural institution may be on the way out.
Marriage may be going out of style amongst millennials.
The current marriage rate is at its lowest point in a century, and it's dropping.
Of course it's dropping. We're just finally being honest with ourselves that it's not normal. You meet a couple that's been married for 50 years and no one says, yeah, that checks out, that's par for the course. It's always, oh my God, how did you do it? What's your secret? And you always get the same response. She says, well, it's all about compromise. And then the guy chuckles and says, yeah, she's always right. And then he looks down at the floor and a small portion of him dies. Well, people say, well, marriage is hard work. F*** that. F*** that. I don't want to come home from work and have even more work. I don't even want to go to work for work.
Take my wife, please. It's a Henny Youngman joke, I think. It's a real old one. And certainly comes from an era where marriage was much more common, accepted, celebrated than it is today. So this idea that people who get married and stay together for a long time, that there's a kind of contempt that grows between these parties, certainly that is a tale as old as time. That's not what's new or what's different here. What's new and what's different is that Jefferies sees marriage as being fundamentally out of fashion. Look at those 4 examples that he gives at the beginning. Those things are things that are either considered taboo or just not cool anymore, or that no one is paying attention to. They're no longer relevant. They don't resonate with people in the modern world in the way that they used to. We thought they would be around forever, these trends, but they no longer are. And so he is... And he also says, there's a really important thing he says there. He says it's not normal. The fact that we used to think that it was normal, but it's obviously not normal to stick it out with a partner, you know, for your entire life. That's abnormal, and we're finally coming to realize this. We're ultimately enlightened about this. So modern relationships, right? Marriage is declining, and modern relationships are saying that, hey, it shouldn't be this kind of hard work.
The problem with marriage is that we've turned it into something that was never intended to be.
Historians divide marriage in America into 3 different eras. And the first era was really about helping people achieve their basic physiological survival sorts of needs.
In the earliest days, you needed someone to watch your back, since most of your days were spent avoiding shit that could kill you. The marriage contract was like, hey, quick, you grab that potato and I'll look out for velociraptors. Till death do us part. Oh, that was quick. I guess we're parted. Oh, he left the bottom half. That's good. I can have sex and eat tonight. It wasn't until recently that love was even part of the equation.
The modern idea of marriage as being mainly about love and companionship only emerged in the last couple of centuries.
The institution was too sacred, was too important, and so spouses were workmates rather than soulmates.
Where did this idea come from, that spouses had to be soulmates? Like, even if you're in love, there's no such thing as a soulmate. If there really, truly was only one person in the entire universe who's capable of loving you, you're a
In this clip, Jim Jefferies cites a news report that gives us a history of marriage. And I think there's a lot that's suspect about this history. There's always an agenda afoot when you see a history this brief and this definitive. We can read it as gospel or as total fiction. Either way, I don't want to level criticisms against this history just now. What I'd rather do is point out, what is it trying to say about marriage? Clearly, this history is saying that what marriage used to be, we no longer need what marriage used to be. Now marriage is about love, which is not what it ever used to be about, according to this history. So marriage is no longer relevant. At least the old style marriage is no longer relevant as a social institution. And this, perhaps, is why millennials are not getting married. Now, scientist Peter Turchin, who I've been making videos about, and this is another in that series, in his book Ages of Discord, I think he'd beg to differ. And the reason why is because this has happened before. It's happened millennia before. If you look 2,000 years ago, the Emperor Augustus actually saw declining marriage rates and higher adultery rates among the nobles in Rome as a reason to institute marriage laws. Men over a certain age would be penalized if they didn't get married. Women who had fewer than 3 children and were single would also face penalties. And there's debate as to whether or not these laws were effective, but there's no debate about the fact that Augustus, whose one of his interests certainly was creating a powerful, cohesive, unified empire, this Augustus saw marriage as an institution that was necessary for the social fabric of his civilization. So you wonder if the unraveling of marriage, of the fact that people don't trust one another enough to stick it out for decades, to actually build lives together in a truly committed way, in a way that's all about hard work, as Jim Jefferies pointed out. The fact that people aren't willing to do that anymore, or not as often, may say something about our work ethic as a people, and may say something also about what we have to hope for as a society. You see, we're not as secure.
The definition of marriage has changed. Today, people who get married think they're entitled to happiness and fulfillment and all that bullshit, and most of them are in for a real shock.
We're looking not only for love and connection through the marriage and sexual fulfillment, of course, but also for these more tricky, complicated sorts of need fulfillment, needs like self-actualization, personal growth, and a sense of vitality. Because of this additional complexity, more of our marriages are falling short, leaving us disappointed.
No wonder you're disappointed. Vitality in marriage. No one says, I was going to go skydiving this weekend, but instead I'm doing something way cooler, getting yelled at by Becky for not making enough money. Then I'm going to quietly jerk off in the basement next to a box of cat turds. Carpe diem. That's Spanish for good evening. The institution of marriage is an outdated relic of a less enlightened time.
Marriage is an institution that has curtailed women's freedom for centuries. I know feminists who've taken their husband's name because they say it's easier. You're basically being branded, so anyone who sees your name knows immediately who you belong to.
Women aren't property. Sorry, I just have to say that out loud from time to time to remind myself. Women aren't property. I would never make a woman change her last name so people know she belongs to me. All they have to do is look for the disappointment and deep sadness in her eyes, and they'll know she's a Jefferies.
Have you ever heard this phrase, late stage capitalism? To say that we're in a late stage of capitalism, that this worldview and this economic system is coming to an end, certainly evokes the work of Karl Marx. In the Communist Manifesto, Marx and Engels note that the patriarchal family unit is actually the source, the fundamental, like the atomic source of the system of private property. Now, what does that mean, or why would that even be important? Well, Marx has this idea that the history, at the beginning of the Communist Manifesto, he says, the history of all hitherto existing societies is the history of class struggle. That the way we really should think about history, what gets things moving from one era to another, is the fight between the haves and the have-nots. And how is it that we have something, right? What determines the person who has something? Well, the person that has something is the one that can will it to their children. The person that says, hey, I own this house, I own these, I own this money in the bank, I own this company, etc. If that person dies, who does it go to? It goes to their spouse. If they die, who does it go to? It goes to their kids. At least, barring exceptional circumstances. In general, wealth is retained within families. So this idea of women as property, etc., there is a basis, certainly historically, in this conception. And so the idea of property itself, because Marx thought we would transition out, often through violent means, but we would transition out of this ownership of private property to a point where it would be everyone from each according to his ability to each according to his needs. So this idea about that, one of the things that would have to go at that point really is marriage as we commonly conceive it. Marriage as something through which we can bestow property to our children. And that I think is part of why we're seeing marriage almost as outdated, because I think people are deeply dissatisfied right now. People are deeply dissatisfied right now economically. People are making less money than they used to. The working hours and satisfaction, right, among college-educated persons is not nearly as high as it used to be in previous decades. I have another video on that, and I can link to it in the description. We are poorer than our parents, and it's getting worse. And so naturally, we're going to start questioning capitalism. And the way that we do that, in part, is we're going to start questioning marriage. And why would we be questioning marriage? Well, if you're going to get married, you're going to want to have kids, you're going to want to raise a family, and provide for one another, etc., if this whole capitalist system thing works. But right now, because we're making less money than we used to, our situation, we're not as economically appealing to one another. We can barely, right now, make enough money to feed ourselves, a lot of us. We're not able to feed kids, to support a family. Goodness, to save for college, a few $100,000. How many millennials really have a few $100,000 in the bank? A lot of us are moving towards that. But again, we are poorer than our parents. And so, of course, the institution of marriage, which a society where people are getting married regularly, means a society in which people are secure economically and socially. And that kind of stability has been very hard to come by in the last couple decades.
If you're married and you're happy, that's great. But marriage isn't right for a lot of people. That doesn't mean they can't enjoy relationships. Why does it have to be a forever contract or nothing? There's no other option for the rest of us. So I'm proposing a new type of partnership. It's based on the traditional wedding vows. It's called I love you for better. It's a way to tell the person you're with that they're the one for you. At least for the moment, until you change your mind or find someone better. Or until someone stops closing the door when they take a shit, because at that point, you've crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed. Or until your high school crush's divorce is finalised and you can get in there. Yeah. Or until one of you goes completely blind. I mean, there are dogs for that sort of thing. Or until one of you wants to have sex with someone else. I mean, there are dogs for that sort of thing. So for the couples out there that are in a happy, I love you for better situation, congratulations. I think you're going to really temporarily make it.
I love you for better. It's a good joke, but it's funny because it's true. He takes out for worse. It's like saying you love someone in health, but not in sickness. It's like saying you love someone when they're rich, but not when they get poor. Why is he doing that? What's he taking out? He's taking out the element that requires hard work. And why would he be doing that? Why are we no longer willing to put in the hard work it takes to have a lasting marriage? Why is that no longer valuable to us? It could be that we're just growing lazier as a society and we're immoral, etc., etc. And I think, maybe there's an argument to be made for that. But you do hard work when it pays off. I think millennials right now have done a lot of hard work. We're the most educated generation like ever. And yet we're poorer than our parents, as I pointed out. We're not doing as well, but we've done a lot of the hard work that we were told, at least that previous generations told us, hey, this worked for us, this will work for you. We did the hard work, and now it's not working for us. Are you going to blame millennials when they're asking questions about marriage in the same way? Because that supposedly worked for their parents, but look at the divorce rates. Divorce rates are actually lower among millennials because they're getting married less. And it's a heartbreaking situation because what it really indicates is that as a society, we're no longer stable. The path to success that used to work for so many people, the hoops you were supposed to jump through, those hoops are still there. We're still jumping through them, but instead of leaving with a spot at the top, or at least in the middle, we're leaving with a mountain of debt. We're leaving worse off than when we started jumping. I think a lot of millennials would have been better off going to trade school instead of college. And those chickens may come home to roost